My name is Tadeo Clark. I never imagined I would be the man holding a sleeping baby in one arm while reading messages on my wife's phone that would completely destroy my sense of reality. For months I thought the older man texting her was just a kind, harmless friend of the family, someone who cared about us and occasionally brought over diapers or baby food. I trusted him, I trusted her, and I trusted the life we were building together as parents. But the moment I saw their messages, everything stopped. She is 32, he is 72, and what they were planning together while I thought we were raising a child as a team shattered something in me that I do not think I will ever fully get back. This story contains emotionally intense themes including infidelity, betrayal, and psychological distress. Viewer discretion is advised. All names have been changed. This is a true story told respectfully without graphic content and meant for mature audiences only. When I look back now at the early months after our son was born, it's almost painful how peaceful it all felt at the time, because in my mind those days were filled with a kind of quiet chaos that only young parents understand. The constant motion, the endless bottles, the sleepless nights, and somehow through all of it there was this invisible thread holding everything together, and that thread was us. Me and Chloe. We had been together for almost 10 years by then, and we had built a relationship that felt solid, not just in the way we laughed together or touched each other at the end of a long day, but in the small invisible things. Like how she would always fill the coffee maker before bed so it was ready when I got up with the baby. Or how I would run her a hot bath every Sunday night just so she could have 30 minutes to herself. Our love was in the routine and I never questioned it, not for a second. Chloe was 32 and she was still the most beautiful person in every room she walked into. Not just because of how she looked, but because of how she made people feel. She had this softness to her that disarmed everyone. Friends would always tell me how lucky I was to have her, and I believed them. I believed I was lucky. And when we became parents it felt like we had crossed some kind of sacred threshold. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were a family. Our son had just turned 1. He was teething constantly and waking us up 3 or 4 times a night, but I didn't care. I loved every part of it. Even the exhaustion felt like something sacred because we were doing it together, and somewhere in the background of all of this was Avery McDowell. A 72-year-old man with thinning gray hair and a soft-spoken voice who had once been close with our elderly neighbor before she moved away. He had somehow stayed in our lives in this quiet, consistent way. He would knock on our door every couple weeks bringing a bag of baby food or a box of diapers. Sometimes he'd offer parenting tips. Sometimes he'd just ask how we were doing. I never gave it much thought because he seemed harmless. He reminded me of my grandfather. Polite, gentle, well-meaning. He never overstayed his welcome. He would smile. Chloe would thank him. And then he would leave. And I remember thinking once how kind it was that someone who wasn't even family would make that kind of effort to help us. I even felt guilty that I never asked him to come inside for coffee. But now I wonder if he ever wanted coffee at all. Chloe always received his visits with appreciation, but nothing more than that. She would smile and say thank you and tuck whatever he brought under her arm before turning back toward the baby. Nothing about it ever seemed unusual. But then again, at the time, I wasn't looking for anything. And slowly, almost too slowly to notice, there were these moments that started to feel a little bit off. She began spending more time on her phone, but I didn't think much of it. We were both exhausted. And scrolling at night was one of the only ways either of us could shut our brains off for a few minutes. But then there were the smiles. Those small secret smiles she would give the screen when she thought I wasn't looking. Or the way she started sleeping with her phone turned face down. The kind of behavior you notice but dismiss because you don't want to believe it could mean anything. There was a moment. Late one evening. When she was curled up on the couch with her back to me and her phone lit up, she laughed under her breath just once. And when I asked her what was funny, she locked the screen and said it was just something stupid in one of her mom groups. I nodded and said nothing. Because why would I question her? She was my wife. We were raising a child together. And this was just another night in a long stretch of nights where we were trying to survive parenthood with love and patience. I didn't realize then that something was already slipping through the cracks. That the smiles, the silence, the comfort I mistook for peace, was slowly making room for something else. Avery was just a helpful old man. Or so I thought. In the beginning I kept telling myself that nothing had changed, not in any way that mattered at least, and even though I could feel something quiet beginning to shift between us, I convinced myself that it was just the weight of parenthood that was causing the distance, that it was just stress or hormones or the natural way things stretch and contract after you bring a life into the world and suddenly everything you do is about someone else. I told myself that Chloe was just tired, that maybe she was overwhelmed, or maybe she was missing parts of herself she had not had time to grieve yet, and I reminded myself over and over again that this is what love looks like sometimes. Quiet and messy and frayed around the edges. But then there were the details. The things that are easy to overlook at first. Like how she started to always keep her phone close to her, never letting it sit more than a few inches away. How it went from something she left on the table without thinking, to something that lived in her hand like it was part of her body. And then came the way she looked at it. Not like someone bored. Not like someone scrolling for recipes or baby tips. But like someone waiting for something specific. Someone watching a thread unfold that meant more than she wanted anyone to see. Some nights she would be quiet, curled up in her hoodie, head down, eyes locked on that glowing screen. And even though we were in the same room, it felt like I was nowhere near her. Other nights she would be strangely affectionate, touching my arm while I cooked, laughing a little too easily at jokes I knew weren't funny, asking questions she had not asked in months. And at first I thought it was a good sign. A return to something I missed. But the whiplash of it all. The way she seemed like she was drifting and then suddenly grabbing for connection. It left me feeling confused. Like I was being pulled toward her and pushed away at the same time. I told myself again and again that this was just a phase. That the long nights and new routines were wearing us both down. And I started to carry guilt. Wondering if maybe I had missed something. If maybe she was trying to tell me she needed help in her own way. And I just was not hearing her. But then came the moment that changed everything. The moment I still replay in my head because it was so small and yet it opened a door I had been pretending wasn't there. She had gone upstairs to take a shower. Our son was finally asleep. The house was still. And I was just cleaning up in the kitchen. Half distracted. Half exhausted. And then I saw it. Her phone. Sitting face down on the counter. A soft glow pushing out from beneath it as it buzzed quietly once. Then twice. I was not looking for anything. I wasn't. But something about the way it pulsed there on the counter. Like it was waiting, like it was calling. I do not know how else to describe it. So I walked over slowly. My stomach already tightening in ways I could not explain. And I turned it over. Telling myself again that it was probably nothing. Probably a grocery store reminder. Or one of those late-night texts from a friend who had forgotten the time. But the name on the screen froze me. Avery McDowell. I had not thought about him in weeks. He had not been around. He had not dropped anything off. There had been no conversation. No mention of him at all. And yet there he was. On her phone. Texting her. In the middle of the night. I remember staring at the screen. Feeling my hands go cold. And my heart starting to race in a way I couldn't slow down. And there was this voice in my head. This voice that said maybe it was innocent. Maybe he was checking in. Maybe he was just that same old man who liked to make sure we were okay. But that voice was being drowned out. By something louder. Something sharper. The part of me that already knew. And I stood there for a moment. Just breathing. Just frozen. And then I picked it up. And I opened it. And my world split in half. When I picked up her phone that night and opened it with shaking hands and a heart that already seemed to know it was about to break, I think deep down I was still hoping to find something simple, something harmless, something that would let me walk away from that moment with a sense of relief instead of devastation. But that hope was gone the second my eyes landed on the screen and the words started to unfold in front of me like a slow-motion car crash I could not stop watching even if I wanted to. Because what I found was not one message, not a single line that could be dismissed or explained away or brushed under the rug as a misunderstanding. It was a full conversation, a thread that stretched far back into days and nights I thought we had spent together in peace, only to realize now that while I was changing diapers and boiling bottles and falling asleep beside my wife in what I thought was the safety of love, she had been living a second life right in front of me, in the palm of her hand, hidden behind passwords and silence and the belief that I would never look. The messages were bold, unfiltered, and far more intimate than anything I had prepared myself for, and they weren't just casual words or innocent check-ins like I had once convinced myself Avery might send. They were loaded with intention and desire and private moments that had no place in a marriage. No place in a home where a child was learning to sleep through the night under the roof of two people who were supposed to be protecting him from everything ugly in the world. Only now I realized the ugliest thing was already inside. She had written things that shook me in ways I didn't know words could, things about what she would wear the next time they saw each other, how she missed the way he looked at her like she was something rare, something beautiful, something that made him feel alive. And he would reply with things I can still hear in my head when the room is too quiet, things about how he couldn't wait to touch her, to be alone with her, to do the things they had only hinted at the last time I almost caught them. And it made me sick to realize that these two people, one who had held my child and the other who had given birth to him, were making plans for moments that would have destroyed everything if I had not seen it first. I stood there reading message after message, barely blinking, barely breathing, as if part of me had left the room, as if I had stepped outside of myself and was watching it all unfold from a place where time didn't matter anymore, where everything I thought was real was falling apart one sentence at a time, and even as my hands started to shake and the tears built up without falling, I kept scrolling, because I needed to see it all. I needed to know just how far she had gone, just how far I had been left behind. She had told him she dreamed about him, that she had woken up aching, that she felt something with him she couldn't explain, and it didn't matter that they hadn't physically done anything, not yet, because the betrayal was already complete, the intimacy had already shifted, and the parts of her that used to belong to me now lived in the space between their messages, in the hidden moments she had chosen to give to someone else. When she came downstairs, wrapped in a towel with steam still clinging to her skin and no idea what was waiting for her in the living room, I remember thinking how normal she looked, how peaceful, how she still looked like the woman I loved, the woman who had fallen asleep with our baby on her chest and told me I was a good father, a good man. The woman who had made a life with me from scratch and promised she would never let anything come between us, and for a second I felt like I was about to break in half because I wanted that to still be true so badly it physically hurt. I held up her phone and I asked her the one question that had no answer that could ever make this right. I asked her what this was, what all of it meant, and the way her face collapsed under the weight of that moment told me that she already knew it was over, she already knew she had gone too far, and I think part of her had been waiting for this moment, had been walking straight toward it with her eyes closed, hoping maybe she would never have to look me in the eye and say the words out loud. She broke, completely and without hesitation, her body folding into the couch, her hands covering her face, the sobs coming out of her like something deep had finally snapped, and she kept saying she was sorry, over and over again, so many times that it started to sound like a song stuck on repeat, like a word she thought might fix something if she said it enough times in a row. But nothing about her crying felt like the kind of sorrow that comes with true regret, it felt more like she was mourning the fact that she had been caught. I asked her how long it had been going on, and she said she didn't know, that it wasn't serious, that it was stupid and meaningless and she never meant to hurt me, and when I asked her why, when I looked her straight in the face and begged her to just give me one honest reason why she would do this to me, to us, to our son, she said the one thing that shattered me completely, she said she didn't know. She didn't know why. She didn't know how it started. She didn't know what it meant. She just kept saying she didn't know, and I realized that maybe she really didn't, that maybe whatever led her down that path was something broken inside her I could never reach, something I could never fix, no matter how much I loved her. And even in the middle of all that, even after seeing what I saw, hearing what I heard, feeling everything in me collapse at once, I still looked up at the baby monitor and saw our son sleeping. And I still thought about our history. And I still wondered if we could come back from this. Because love doesn't disappear all at once. Even when it should. So I told her if she was serious. If she really wanted to fix this, she had to end it completely. Cut him off. Delete everything. Block his number. Tell him it was over. She nodded. Still sobbing. And she promised she would. She said she had already been thinking about it. She said she hated what she had done. She said it was over. And I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to believe her. Because if I didn't, then everything we had meant nothing. And I wasn't ready to lose it all in one night. She told me it was over. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. After that night when she promised me it was over and swore to me through tears that she had blocked his number and deleted every message and wanted nothing more than to fix what she had broken and hold on to the life we had built together, I tried to tell myself that maybe we had hit the worst of it, that maybe this was the rock bottom moment couples sometimes talk about surviving. The kind that shakes you awake and changes the way you see everything, because even though my heart was still raw and my chest still tightened every time she picked up her phone, I wanted so badly to believe that her regret was real and that her apology was more than just damage control, and so I stayed silent, holding on to this fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth this time. But the thing about betrayal is that once it slips into a relationship, it changes the way silence feels, it changes the way a glance lands, it changes the way you notice things that once felt invisible, and so I started seeing everything again, only now, I could not unsee it. She was still on her phone just as much, if not more, but now she was more cautious, more precise with her movements, always turning the screen away from me just slightly, always clearing her notifications, and when I would come into a room unexpectedly she would lock it instantly or switch apps like she was chasing down something innocent that had already slipped away, and I kept trying to convince myself that maybe I was just wounded, maybe I was just paranoid, maybe the first betrayal had damaged my trust so badly that even her effort would look suspicious. But that voice inside me, the one I had tried to quiet for weeks, started growing louder, more certain, more convinced that the truth had never actually left, it had just gone into hiding. And then there were the little things that added up in silence, like how she started avoiding eye contact more often, how she would get frustrated over the smallest things, how she seemed to be somewhere else even when she was standing right in front of me, and there was a stiffness in her hugs that had not been there before, a performative closeness like she was doing what she thought she was supposed to do but her heart was already somewhere else, already gone, already given away in messages I was not meant to read. I started watching patterns again, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop myself anymore. I was living inside a house that looked like home but no longer felt like it, next to a woman who smiled like my wife but no longer moved like the person I married, and even though she wasn't saying anything, even though she wasn't acting guilty in an obvious way, everything about her had changed, and I knew, in that deep wordless place where your instincts scream the truth long before your logic catches up, that she was still talking to him. And I tried to sit with that, tried to hold on to my composure, tried to let it pass like a bad dream, but one evening she left her phone on the table for only a moment while she went into the kitchen to pour juice, and I did not mean to look at it, I truly didn't, but when it lit up and my eyes caught the name glowing on the screen like some ghost from a story I had already buried, I felt my breath catch in my throat, and all the silence I had been carrying suddenly turned heavy again, because it was him, it was Avery, again. I told myself to walk away, told myself I didn't need to know more, but my hand was already reaching, already flipping the screen upward, already unlocking what little part of me still. Let's plan better. And I just stood there. Not moving. Not reacting. Not breathing for a moment longer than I could handle. Because it wasn't just the words. It was the casualness of them. The history they implied. The confidence that this was ongoing. That it was not a mistake. That it had never stopped. She had deleted her side of the conversation. Just like that. As if her words disappearing made her less guilty. As if I could only be hurt by half the story. But I had seen enough. I had seen more than enough. And this time, I didn't confront her. I didn't raise my voice or show her the screen. I didn't fall apart in the kitchen like I had before. Because something in me had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after too much noise. The kind of quiet that feels like surrender. I watched her come back into the room. Sit down. Act normal. Act tired. Act like a woman trying. And I realized in that moment that I was the only one who had ever really been trying. Later that night, I told her. I told her I saw the message. I told her I knew she had lied again. That she had looked me in the face and swore it was over. And that I had given her every ounce of trust one had left. Only for her to throw it away like it meant nothing. And she cried again. Of course she cried, but this time there was no shock in her face. No panic. No desperate apology. Just exhaustion. Just more excuses. She started talking about her past. About abandonment. About her father. About the way she had always felt unlovable. Invisible. Unworthy of someone who stayed. She said Avery made her feel seen. Said she didn't know why she kept going back. That it wasn't about sex or love. But about the validation. About control. About being wanted in a way she didn't even understand. And I listened. Because I always listen. Because part of me wanted so badly to believe that this was just trauma spilling over. That she didn't mean to hurt me. That she wasn't trying to destroy what we had. That maybe if I loved her hard enough, patiently enough, I could help her heal. But as I sat there, staring at a woman who had hurt me not once but twice, who had chosen someone else not once but repeatedly, I started to feel something I hadn't felt before. I started to feel clarity. I started to understand that this wasn't about her pain. This wasn't about her childhood. This wasn't about any old man who made her feel desired. This was about choice. She had chosen to betray me. She had chosen to lie. She had chosen to continue. And now she was choosing to turn her pain into a shield. To use it like a curtain that made her look small and helpless when the truth was, she had full control the entire time. And as I sat there, realizing that she wasn't sorry for what she did, but only sorry that I caught her again, something inside me finally started to let go. She wasn't sorry. She was just sorry I caught her again. After that second betrayal, something in me stopped reaching for answers, because I think when someone hurts you once, you ask why with your whole chest and your whole heart, and you wait for something, anything, that makes it make sense. But when they do it again, when they lie again, when they look you in the eyes and break the same promise twice, it stops being about confusion and starts becoming something heavier, something colder, something that sinks into your bones and makes everything around you feel like it's moving in slow motion. And for the first time in my relationship with Chloe, I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear her voice trying to stitch together another excuse. I didn't want to sit in another room listening to another story about pain that somehow always led back to me being asked to understand her again. I just wanted the noise to stop. And because her mother Raina was living with us at the time, still helping out with the baby, still present in every corner of the house like another shadow I hadn't invited but couldn't remove, I thought maybe, just maybe, telling her would bring some kind of clarity, some third voice that could say what I was too exhausted to say anymore. So I pulled her aside one morning while Chloe was upstairs, and I told her everything. Not out of spite, not to shame her daughter, not to create drama, but because I needed to speak the truth out loud to someone who might actually see it for what it was. And I'll never forget the way Raina blinked at me while I was talking, never forget how her face stayed still and unreadable while I explained how her daughter had lied, how she had continued talking to a man 4 decades older than her, how she had made me feel like a stranger in my own home, in my own marriage, how she had betrayed me after swearing she never would again, and how I didn't know what to do anymore. How I was holding on by a thread for the sake of our child, but that I was running out of room inside myself to keep absorbing this kind of pain. And when I finished speaking, when I finally stopped to breathe, Raina just looked at me and said, without even pausing, without even softening her tone, that it was just texting, that I was probably overreacting, that I shouldn't let something like this ruin a good thing, because men her age, and she meant Avery, men like that don't pose a real threat, and maybe Chloe was just looking for attention, and it was probably nothing serious, and I should try to forgive and forget because every couple has their bumps and bruises. And I think in that moment, standing in the hallway of my own house, hearing the mother of the woman who had broken me dismiss my pain like it was some fragile inconvenience, I felt something collapse inside me, something important, because it wasn't just about Chloe anymore. It was about the way this whole thing had made me invisible, the way my feelings were being attended and erased and explained away by people who weren't the ones being hurt. I felt gaslit. I felt like a ghost. Like I was screaming in a room full of people who had already decided they wouldn't hear me no matter how loud I got. And it made the house feel smaller. Made my chest feel tighter. Made my bed feel colder even when she was still in it. And that night I sat alone in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed, and I just stared at nothing, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the walls, and I started to think that maybe I was going crazy, maybe I was the problem, maybe I was just too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to let go of something she clearly didn't think was worth this level of grief. But then I reached for my phone, and I messaged my oldest friend Brody Estrada, and I told him everything, the whole story from the beginning, every message, every lie, every time I had swallowed my pride and tried to stay, and he didn't respond right away. But when he did, he didn't hesitate. He told me I wasn't crazy. He told me I wasn't imagining the pain. That what Chloe had done wasn't just a mistake. That it wasn't a bump in the road. That it was a betrayal. A repeated one. A choice. And that no amount of guilt or manipulation or emotional backstory could change that fact. And I cannot tell you what it meant to hear that. To finally feel like someone could see me. To feel like my hurt had weight. To feel like I wasn't screaming into a void. But actually speaking. And being heard. And in the days that followed, I started moving differently. I didn't argue anymore. Didn't question. Didn't beg for closeness or reach for resolution. I simply told Chloe that she needed to sleep on the couch. That she could no longer sleep beside me like nothing had happened. That this house was no longer going to operate under the illusion that we were okay. Because we weren't. And I couldn't protect her feelings anymore while mine were bleeding out on the FL where she didn't say much. Didn't protest. Just nodded and grabbed the blanket. And I watched her walk away like someone who didn't understand that this was the beginning of the end. Or maybe she did understand. And she just didn't care anymore. And in those quiet nights afterward, when the baby was asleep, and she was in the other room, and I was lying alone in the bed we once shared, I realized something that felt like it had always been waiting for me. I was mourning someone who was still living in my house. And she didn't even notice. There comes a moment when you stop arguing with reality, when you stop trying to make sense of something that's already broken beyond recognition, and instead of asking why, you just start accepting what is, and that's where I was. Not angry, not screaming, not holding on to some last thread of hope that she might suddenly become the version of her I loved again, just quiet, just done, just ready to take back what little piece I still had left. So I sat her down one morning, not out of spite or to deliver some dramatic ultimatum, but because I needed her to hear the words from my mouth, not in rage, not in pain, but in something that sounded a lot like calm, and I told her, clearly and without hesitation, that I was done, that whatever this marriage had become was no longer something I could live inside of, that the promises we made had already been broken too many times, and that I could no longer keep waking up next to someone who saw my trust as something they could trade in for attention. She looked at me with this strange stillness in her face, like she wasn't surprised but still hadn't fully processed what I was saying, and after a long pause, she asked me the one question I had been dreading the most, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. She asked if I still loved her. And I said yes. I said yes, I do. Because love doesn't just turn off like a switch, because love isn't always enough to save something, because sometimes love becomes the thing that hurts the most, and I told her that I did love her, but love without trust isn't love at all, not really, it's just memory, it's just longing, it's just a slow death in a house that still pretends to be a home. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. And I think part of her knew that this wasn't a punishment. It was a release. In the days that followed, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Not happiness. Not yet. But the beginning of something quieter. Something honest. Because when you stop guiding for someone who won't GHT for you, you make room to start guiding for yourself. And as I sit here now, looking back on everything, I realize that our relationship wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that's what makes it hurt the most. Because I gave her something true. And she gave that part of herself to someone else. And it was never just about the messages. It wasn't just about the old man or the photos or the plans. It was about the choice. About the selfishness. About her knowing exactly what she was doing. And doing it anyway. I used to think the worst pain in the world was being cheated on. But I've learned that sometimes the deeper pain comes from staying. From trying to fix what someone else keeps breaking. From offering grace to someone who sees it as weakness. From waking up every day hoping for change and falling asleep with the same grief in your chest. At some point, the pain of staying became worse than the fear of leaving. And that's when I knew. I had to go. I had to choose peace over potential. Healing over history. I had to choose myself. And if you're still listening, if you've made it this far into my story, I want to say this to you. Sometimes the person you love most will do the thing that breaks you in half. And ask you to keep holding them afterward. Sometimes they will look you in the eye with tears and lies in the same breath and ask you to carry the weight of their choices. And you might. For a while. You might carry it because you're kind. Because you love them. Because you believe in forgiveness. Because you have a child together. Because you think love means endurance. But if they keep doing it, if they keep choosing themselves at your expense, if they keep breaking you, you are allowed to put that weight down. To everyone who has walked away from pain they didn't cause. To everyone who stayed too long in the hope that love alone could fix what respect had already destroyed. To everyone who kept showing up for someone who never really showed up for them. I see you. I hear you. I am you. And if this story meant something to you, if you felt seen in any part of it, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want to be part of stories that tell the truth without shame. And tell me in the comments, what part of this hit you the hardest. Because I'll be reading. And I'll be right there with you.